Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's session on AI transparency in education. Before I introduce our wonderful speakers, for those of you who are tuning in to your first ever Startup Academy webinar session, the Startup Academy is sponsored by Cooley, and it is a virtual webinar series that brings on experts across the edtech and workforce industry. And is really catered towards early stage startups, providing insight and advice as you all build your companies within the industry. And just a quick reminder that you can ask Q&A at any point during the session, and then we will get to open Q&A at the end. And then also a reminder that before the ASU GSV Summit this year, we will be hosting the inaugural AIR Show, which stands for AI Revolution. Will be April 13th to 15th in San Diego, and will exhibit the most innovative AI startups within education and workforce. So if you have any questions about it, please feel free to email me or Fran Rosenberg. With that, I am thrilled to introduce our speakers today. So first we have Satya Nitta, who is the founder and CTO and CEO of Merlyn Mind, and then Elizabeth Reilley, who is the executive director of AI acceleration at ASU. So quickly, do you both just want to quickly give a short intro on yourselves before we dive into the questions and obviously what you both are working on?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Hi, everybody. I have a background as a technologist. I spent 18 years at IBM Research before I founded Merlyn Mind. Broadly in computing, I've spent my first half of my career advancing Moore's law, and the second half building conversational systems and AI and broadly NLP systems. At Merlyn Mind, we're building domain-specific AI platforms and assistants. So we build our own suite of large language models, and we also build voice-activated AI assistants.
Awesome.
And hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth from Arizona State University. I lead our AI team in our enterprise technology unit at ASU. We are building both platforms and products in the AI space. So building custom products for our community and building platforms that enable development, not only for our own internal teams, but for teams across the university who are innovating in the AI realm and want to make use of generative AI. We have a cloud agnostic and model agnostic platform. So at this point, our platform has 7 different models that are available. We're integrated with all the major cloud service providers, and I'm really excited to be here today with you all.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So I guess we'll just kick it off. First question to you, Elizabeth. So today we really want to talk about, as we talk about AI transparency in education, obviously I can cover a lot of topics, but there are major concerns around anything from data privacy to hallucinations to biases and algorithms. And so as you look to work with different vendors, as you think about an ASU looking to work with different vendors, what are some of those key kind of almost table stakes that you think that these vendors must have in order to start to work with them around AI?
Yeah, we look for people who are honest about the limitations and honest about the risks. So if somebody tries to tell us that they're using a large language model with just a GUI in front of it, and there's nothing else really going on in the background, and that it won't hallucinate at all under any circumstances, that's someone who's not being genuine with us. And so we look for people who are able to speak intelligently about the risks and are also trying new things in the area of risk mitigation. We look for folks who are using a variety of different models, so who are integrating the right model for the right purpose in the right place to increase that accuracy and reliability, but also to decrease costs. So not every application needs a GPT-4 or GPT-4 Turbo to be effective. So there's more cost-effective models that are out there that can be used, and those are things that we look for. We look for folks who are good stewards of our finances and of their own finances, and also good stewards of our data. We also look for folks who are not just putting a GUI or a graphical user interface in front of GPT 3.5, maybe with a little bit of RAG or with some prompt engineering in the background. We look for folks who are really going to be an innovation partner with us and who are leaning deeply into the ethics of AI and are trying novel approaches. So we want to see that level of maturity in terms of model management, model appropriateness, and then also that maturity in terms of transparency and honesty around some of the ethical issues and risks and really innovative approaches to mitigating those.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so there's not necessarily, whether it's an open source model, closed source model, there's nothing there in terms of a specific LLM you'd want them to work with. It's more so you would want them to work with multiple. Am I understanding that correctly?
Multiple or right model for the right purpose, depending on what the application is. So not everything has to be a many model situation, but we want to see that there's a lot of thought and intention behind picking the right models for the right tasks and seeing that value alignment as well with us at ASU, including inclusion, student success, putting students first, putting their success first. Those are things that are really important for us.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I guess in the same kind of topic, Satya, Merlyn is building or has built their own LLM specifically for education. And so can you talk a little bit about what you're doing, why you think that's really important for this sector, and why it really needs its own specific education LLM? You're on mute, Satya. It's okay, I do that all the time.
Let me redo that. What Elizabeth covered is exactly what we're building. It was actually amazing hearing her. She is absolutely right. It's about the right model for the right application. GPT-4 is the most capable model, actually now the second most capable model on the planet as of yesterday. But it is essentially, overkill to use for a variety of applications. Okay, if the entire task is you just want to generate questions or lesson plans or answer questions or summarize documents, you can actually do it at a state-of-the-art level, GPT-4 level, or a Gemini level, with much smaller models, purpose-built, and that's what we specialize in. So at Merlyn, I love the point that Elizabeth said about you want to be responsible stewards of cost, both the company's cost and the client's cost. At Merlyn, that's exactly what we're all about. We can build these things in order of magnitude cheaper, faster, safer than GPT-4, and that allows us to stitch multiple models together in the service of a solution. Models that look for sensitive, and appropriate and safe use of LLMs as a filter. Models that isolate PII, models that work off of a very high quality RAG system. So we believe in taking a very thoughtful approach to AI with much smaller domain specific models to serve solutions. And we're already getting a lot of inbounds from people who are doing the math and thinking, GPT-4, GPT 3.5 isn't the way to scale. There must be a much better way to scale. And scale being once you start hitting millions of users using models tens of times a day, it's completely unaffordable to sit on top of these generalist models, and that's kind of where we come in. And we also extend the technology to do things like curriculum alignment, as an example. Okay, you could do all of these with GPT-4, but you'd be prompt engineering, and prompt engineering is generally not a very robust way to build AI systems because models drift. OpenAI could update GPT-4 for whatever, any number of reasons, and the model would shift, and most of your prompts might not work. And so we actually believe in building purpose-built models for specific tasks and for the application at hand. That's what we do.
That's really, so I guess curriculum is one. What are some other examples actually in the classroom, and how you're applying these purpose-built models?
Sure, yeah. So we have, at this point, we have something like 20 models. We're about to publish a playground with about half a dozen of those that are fully built, red teamed, vetted, safe, and highly accurate. Off the top of my head, we have a chat with RAG model. We have a safety and age appropriateness model. We have a summarization model. We have a question answering model. So we have I'm blanking on it, but yeah, we have about 6 or 7 that will release very shortly. All these are basically in the service of applications. So we also have an assistant which is driving some of the model development. The assistant itself does things like question generation, question answering, and it does group activity suggestions. We have things like reformulation models, so you can take a particular sentence and reformulate it and use the model. Topic detection, sentiment analysis, all these kinds of things were models for.
Yeah. I want to go back to your point because it's really interesting. I want to pose this to both of you. You said that if you just kind of rely on prompt engineering, that these models can change, the underlying models can change, and then your prompts can be outdated and completely relevant point. I'm curious if you think that these startups, these vendors that you work with can make a safe model or make a curriculum aligned model by just fine tuning and using RAG or using prompt engineering on top of these large language models? Or do you feel like you need purpose built models?
Yeah, no, I don't believe so. I don't. So first of all, if you're sitting on top of ChatGPT as a wrapper, as Elizabeth indicated, I don't think that's really a way to scale AI solutions. Okay. And on top of that, generally what's well accepted now in the field is that prompt engineering is the least robust way to do something. Fine tuning is a far better way to do something, and pre-training a model is the best way to do something. And so that's basically the general hierarchy. But the question was for Elizabeth, so I'll toss it back to you, Alex.
Oh, sorry, I know we lost you for a second there. The question was, as ASU looks to work with these vendors, right? And Satya was talking about these, pre-trained, purpose-built models. Do you believe that vendors can adequately meet your certain thresholds around accuracy or curriculum alignment or safety by just fine-tuning? I guess prompt engineering and then fine-tuning and then do you
Yeah,
feel
actually, no, fine tuned. So I just want to, just interject very quickly, just to be sure that we're accurate about terminology. Fine tuning models is actually very good. Prompt engineering is you're not actually fine tuning models at all. Prompt engineering is not fine tuning. Fine tuning is a deep AI task where you're getting a model to forget everything it's learned and learn something new. Okay.
Yeah.
So
so I guess as we just think about those 3 tiers, right? Like you already said that you don't really think just a wrapper around any of these models is sufficient. Do you feel like these fine-tuning models can sufficiently, meet the needs that ASU has around leveraging some of these models, or do you feel like you would prefer pre-trained models?
Yeah, so fine-tuning helps a lot, but it's certainly not the panacea. So through our own experimentation and product development, and then also through what we're seeing in the research, we're seeing a lot of information coming out that fine tuning is good for some situations, like if you're trying to capture voice or you're trying to capture something like tone and style. Fine tuning works really beautifully for applications like that. But when we have situations where facts are really important, where giving the correct information is of utmost importance, fine tuning isn't always the best approach, or fine tuning alone, I should say, isn't always the best approach. So you might want to fine tune a model and then combine that with something like RAG, where you're looking at specific information. I also think one of the things that we need to do is think more broadly about things like new embeddings models. So just the language that we use in education in certain fields is so specific that it's different from the norm of what we'll see in the normal discourse. So like in financial aid, for example, the word aid has a very specific meaning that's different from things like first aid or providing aid for someone else in terms of the semantic meaning of those words and in terms of its relationship to other words. So thinking about how do we create embeddings models that help other models and large language models to really understand the language specific to the domains, I think is where we need to go next, in addition to fine tuning, in addition to RAG, and in addition to that model training that Satya had referred to earlier.
Yeah, that's really very interesting. I would be curious to think about other examples like the financial aid and other types of words that are really education specific. I guess shifting gears a little bit as we think about obviously data, everything around data privacy, whether we're talking about COPPA laws or FERPA. Elizabeth, how do you, especially with a startup that has likely very little track record, is just starting out, how can they gain your trust around making sure they're in compliance with really taking care and ensuring the safety and the privacy of the data of students?
Yeah, so I think having an understanding of what FERPA is and what GDPR is and how that might impact higher education is really important. So when we talk to startups or when we talk to sometimes very large companies, and we are seeing no real knowledge about the requirements of FERPA and no real knowledge about the types of regulations that we have in higher education around student data privacy, there's an immediate mistrust there. Everything that comes after that about your ISO certifications and the security of the platform is kind of moot if we feel like we're not speaking the same language in terms of the requirements on our end. So being able to put things in place where we feel really comfortable that our data is not being intermingled with the data of other institutions, where we have trust in exactly what our students' data will be used for, and that's used for that specific application, and making that work and not being given to anyone else anywhere else. Those are the kinds of things we need. That comes through trust, and some of that trust is built by working with startups who understand our compliance and our regulation language, and also our deep concern about our students and their concerns about privacy.
Mm-hmm. And Satya, what do you do? I guess I know you work with a lot of K-12 institutions as well. What are kind of some of the ways you get them to trust what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, so in addition to FERPA and COPPA, there's GDPR as well. Sorry, FERPA and GDPR, there's COPPA as well. COPPA is for children's privacy protection, which typically isn't a big deal in colleges because you're 18 and above. But for K-12, it's a very big deal. So we go through enormous amounts of trouble to ensure that we're FERPA, COPPA, and GDPR compliant. And this includes, first of all, totally understanding the laws, understanding things like your responsibilities in terms of isolating data, protecting data, deleting data, building the right architecture to ensure that you're actually being compliant with these regulations. So for us, so as we are a startup, and I would like to say we've spent millions of dollars in legal fees and millions of dollars in architecting systems correctly to be compliant with these regulations, because that is a barrier to entry, and it's a very big barrier to entry. And unless you're actually going to be responsible custodians here and being actually compliant, you should not be doing this. Okay, so now I would like also suggest further that OpenAI themselves have said they really shouldn't be using ChatGPT for children under 13, and 13 to 18 you need to get parental permission. And they don't ever make claims about being FERPA, COPPA compliant, etc. Okay. So if you're a wrapper on top, you have to be really careful about trusting your LLM provider about statements they're making, because one of the things one has to realize here is that the moment any sensitive PII is uttered by a student in a classroom or outside a classroom that's captured by your application, now the data is sitting with you, with the OpenAI, with the LLM provider, and with the cloud provider, and all of them have to be completely in compliance for you to be in compliance with these regulations. And that's the thing that most people miss. This is actually very serious. I would like the founders who are listening to this to take this very seriously, because if you don't do this appropriately, not only are you going to get banned from schools, your product, but it's going to cause a blowback for the entire sector as well. And we've already seen this happen before, about a decade ago with InBloom. So we have to take this as an enormously important responsibility, and just as important as building products and product market fit. It has to be one of the three most important things that a startup CEO has to worry about if they're going into education with AI.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point. And just to even double click that, so if I'm a startup listening to this, right, it almost can feel a little overwhelming to say, like you said, you need millions of dollars in legal fees to make sure you're compliant with all that. Do you feel like that's the only path? Do you kind of need a lot of upfront capital to make sure you're compliant with everything around all these data laws and privacy laws? Is there another way to kind of go about it? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you don't have to spend millions of dollars if you have like lawyers in your network who can help you out. I mean, startup founders are enormously resourceful. You don't necessarily need to hire the best and brightest lawyers in the country, who are the most expensive to do this. But you absolutely have to be completely on top. As a CEO, as a founder, it is your responsibility. The buck stops with you. And the reason I'm being somewhat emphatic here is I see a lot of companies out there claiming they're compliant. We know they're not. Um,
Mm.
Now it's up to the buyer, and not everybody. Most K-12 schools aren't as aware or as sophisticated as ASU and Elizabeth here to say, okay, I'm actually going to test you for compliance. And right, so there is you can definitely get your product sold without being fully compliant by claiming you're compliant, but you are taking a huge risk that could actually blow back both on you and your company and on the field at large. And I want us to be very careful as a community to be compliant and to be aware of these regulations.
Absolutely. I think that's a great call to action for all the startups building in this space. And all, potential buyers at these institutions who might be tuning in as well. Just to really make sure, that these vendors are compliant. I guess, again, shifting gears a little bit as there's a lot of talk around potential algorithmic bias that kind of might manifest itself in different ways through these models, especially as some, I know yours are not less so, but some can feel like black box. I'm curious if have either of you kind of encountered these issues with Satya, either with Merlyn Mind or Elizabeth, with some of the vendors you're working with, or what ASU is doing, and what have you kind of done to address them and to try to prevent some of these biases from manifesting? Elizabeth, I guess we'll start with you.
Sure. So we've certainly seen a lot of algorithmic bias in our work with various models. I don't think we have not encountered a model, even those that are much more mature, that does not have algorithmic bias that comes out in a variety of different ways. So I think this is another area where the folks that we work with, the vendors we work with, we want that honesty and that transparency. And we want folks to be able to give examples of, hey, here's in our development life cycle, here's an example of where we were doing testing and we ran into some of this algorithmic bias, and here's how we address that. And now look at where we are. Here's where we still have concerns. Here's where there are still risks. So being honest and transparent about those risks, that really helps to engender that trust, being able to give those examples so that we can write policy and guidelines for our students or for our faculty or for our staff about how to use some of these tools and under what circumstances, and some use cases where you might not want to use some of these tools, to let folks know that information up front so that they can go into interaction with the tool, with the application, being informed about the limitations. We've seen this come out. We did a hackathon for the humanities a few months ago, where we had students from across ASU, humanities majors and computer science majors alike, all together doing work to basically build a playbook for a persona. So for a philosopher, or for a journalist, or for a creative writer, on how those different areas could use AI and how they could not, and to provide some examples. So the group that actually won our hackathon, they created a product that they called Dance GPT. And it was a very cool project where they created, through ChatGPT, they were able to create basically like how you would line up dancers for a variety of different international dancers. One of the students on the team was an expert in dance, was passionate about dance. But one of the things that they pointed out was they tried to use some models to create images of how you might dress somebody for different international dances, and they found a lot of bias in those images that were created. And so in pointing that out, being upfront about that, showing that that's a limitation, that's something that's really important.
Yeah. Satya, do you have anything to add on the topic? Totally fine.
No, I think Elizabeth did a great job covering it. Bias is endemic to these things. So just to, kind of expand on that a little bit, I think she's correct in that, someone who comes in and says, my models have no bias is either ignorant of how these things are built or is not being entirely, genuine. So by nature of this technology, you basically have to train this on a huge amount of data. So on average, if you build a 1 billion parameter model, you have to have 20 billion tokens, which will be roughly about 14 billion words or something like that. Okay, all of Wikipedia has 4 billion words, so you have to get all kinds of other stuff from various other places. And most models that are in use today are about 10 billion parameters. So to get 200 billion tokens, you're sucking in all kinds of information, and unfortunately some of it is stuff that's garbage. And so the oldest saying in machine learning is garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so you have to be aware that the fact that these models are learning language includes training on all kinds of human generated data, and now you have to engineer around that. And so Elizabeth mentioned earlier in the podcast about RAG. The way we attempt to mitigate bias as much as possible is get the models to work off of a custom corpus of data. Okay, really, all we really want a model to do is to understand the language, English as the case may be, and follow instructions. Okay, and the instructions here are go work off of this walled garden of content and data, answer questions, generate questions, summarize, etc. And that's a really good way to mitigate or to reduce bias as much as possible. It's not bulletproof, but it gets you a very long way there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how we already got to time with the first session. This went by so quickly. So just quickly, we're going to have Naomi May from Cooley give a very, very short kind of presentation insight onto the legal side as you think about addressing, AI transparency in this sector. And then we'll come back for 10, 15 minutes of open Q&A. And there's been a lot of questions that have already come in. So we'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. It is fantastic to be here with all of you today. Many of you probably know Cooley from our work with GSV and others in the EdTech ecosystem. But for those who don't, we are a global law firm with offices across the world, including the largest and longest standing full service education technology practice. We incorporate deep regulatory expertise. Education is all I do day in and day out with robust emerging companies practice. And not surprisingly, generative AI issues are a part of our daily work right now. I worked in education before going to law school. So like many of you, I am in this work because I love the social impact of what we do. It's truly what gets me up in the morning. But here's the thing, and Satya and Elizabeth pointed this out in a truly insightful way. There is no good intentions exceptions to laws. And education is a very highly regulated industry. Every week we are seeing new orders, guidance, regulations specifically focused on AI, but there is also a significant existing legal framework that has implications for how you use generative AI in your products and companies. And it's never too early to start thinking strategically about the legal framework and challenges. Doing this on the front end will help protect your ability to successfully scale, to attract investment, maximize your valuation, eventually sell or go public. One core example of this that we've already touched on this morning is your approach to children's and student data privacy laws, and particularly in the K-12 space. But there are parallels for higher education as well, as Elizabeth mentioned. So in recent years, there has been a rapid proliferation of laws and corresponding contractual terms, not just COPPA and FERPA, but also literally dozens of state laws. We're up to more than 40 now. And these generally define personal information of a child or student very broadly, and then impose enhanced requirements for notice and consent, and then strict limitations for how you can use that data, particularly utilizing that data to train models and algorithms. So this is at the same time that we're seeing more aggressive enforcement and prioritization of enforcement against edtech companies because of the sensitivity of the data. So we could talk about this all day, but I'll run through a few key examples. Personal information, as I said, under these laws is very broad. That even includes things like IP address and student ID. So even if you have a randomly generated number that's associated with a student record, that student PI in and of itself. And then the laws say things about your use of that student PI. You have to delete it upon termination of the contract, fulfill requests, data subject requests for deletion, and you have to limit your uses of that information to the services that you've been contracted to provide and for no other commercial purpose. So this really can be a challenge in the AI context, first, because you're limited in what data you can use to train your algorithms and any models. And second, because what will the impact be on your models if and when you do have to delete, assuming you even can. So we see many school contracts these days that actually prohibit your use of student data, even if it has been de-identified or anonymized. So a good example is voice recordings. They cannot actually be identified under certain laws effectively because they can be considered biometric data in and of themselves. This is all very overwhelming, but the good news is that there are some very practical ways to manage this. One of the practical risk mitigation strategies that is easiest to implement when you are first developing your products and services and planning your go-to-market strategy. Again, we can talk all day about this, but one key example that I've seen be very useful for providers, specifically in the B2School context, is to thread the needle by developing state-specific data protection agreement templates. These meet the requirements, but without going beyond. This shows school districts that you understand their obligations, so they're more likely to agree to sign your paper instead of requiring you to sign theirs. And what that does is that it gives you maximum flexibility under the law to do what you need to do with regard to your AI products, and it can help you scale without contractual roadblocks. And even, we've seen this often now, can be a differentiator or a competitive advantage when you enter the procurement process. So thanks so much. We'll turn now to Q&A.
Awesome. We're back. Thank you so much, Naomi, for those wonderful insights. So we have had a lot of questions come in, a few overlapping ones, a lot around everything. Satya, I think, your call to action was really good around being compliant around all these data laws. So first question is, we talked about this a little bit, but again, if you can't afford all the legal fees, are there different ways to approach the issue of data privacy? I guess, Elizabeth, we can actually go to you. Assuming they can't afford all these legal fees, what are some kind of maybe lower lift ways if you're an early stage startup to gain the trust that they are complying with all these data laws?
Sure. So I think there are some more out of the box solution, not necessarily completely custom backend development, that products out there that are compliant with FERPA. So building on top of a product that handles the data management pieces that are the most sensitive, that is FERPA compliant, and then focusing more on the front end and the user experiences. There's absolutely FERPA, GDPR, all kinds of other compliance that needs to be taken into account, even from just working on the front end. But that could be something that someone could do to maybe reduce some of those costs and be able to focus their costs and legal fees and incursions more on that experience and that front end experience.
And Satya, as you built out your company, right? If you think about the early stages of product development, are the steps to take around making sure you're compliant with all these laws in the early stages of product development? Does it kind of come after? Where does it really occur in the stage of building?
Yeah, I think it starts at the beginning because see, there are architectural responsibilities here about how to isolate data and how to delete data. Naomi did an exceptional job in summarizing the risks involved. Okay, so this isn't something where you kind of build it and then it becomes an afterthought, because that's dangerous and you could actually be potentially in compliance of these regulations, right? Sorry, in violation of these regulations. So it starts right at the beginning when you are sitting down to put the first piece of architectural diagram down on a piece of paper. You need to be aware of these constraints.
Yeah. And sort of shifting gears a little bit, I feel like ASU is obviously very unique in how innovative and forward thinking they are. Satya, I'm curious if you've as you have encountered maybe some, institutions that aren't as forward thinking or innovative, what has that kind of customer education process been like to get them more comfortable with leveraging generative AI and some of these large language models?
One of the things that is happening, for K-12 largely, the larger school districts are, fairly sophisticated, but, K-12 is like a heavily, as you know, Alex, K-12 is like heavily fragmented, something like 13,000, 15,000 school districts across the country, urban, rural, right, north, south. So there's a variety of customers we encounter. So at the one end of the scale, we have NYC DOE, largest school district in the country, that has very elaborate checklists and privacy and regulatory loopholes you have to jump through to get certified to sell products in the school district, which we just went through. We spent a year getting in there. Okay, and we are now actually compliant to with their particular regulations. At the other end of the scale, we run into anecdotes like a school district out in somewhere in the Midwest. I won't name the school district or the state even, where the procurement officer basically said, "Well, I'm also the chief privacy officer, and all I need to do is put a little check in this box, and then we can procure." Okay, and so that actually shocked us because they just went ahead and procured a very large AI purchase of a particular tool that we knew wasn't actually compliant with some of the regulations. So for us, this is actually very important, and that's if I was emphatic at all in my earlier remarks, it's because we want the industry to wake up and to say, okay, there are some very serious regulations here that one has to be mindful of, and privacy and safety and these kinds of things are not an afterthought. They're actually incredibly important, especially as we move to the generative AI era, where even how you communicate with the language model transmits an incredible amount of information. So I listened with some interest to what Naomi had said about what constitutes personally identifiable information. Even a record that references to a student record, even like a label that references to a student record, could be personally identifiable information. So if you think that's personally identifiable, imagine somebody saying, "I'm being bullied by X and Y in Mrs. Z's class." Okay, there's a tremendous amount of information that's going back and forth, and by and large, I don't know that that the procurement officers in K-12 or in higher ed are largely aware of what they're stepping into here. President Biden came out with an EO. I don't know that goes far enough. It's a start. And all these school districts and universities are looking for guidance from states and the federal government. And I think as startup developers, technology providers, we also ought to be mindful and to help educate the audience about how to procure responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, institutions and districts are obviously, under resourced. So, and are not often well equipped to go through this procurement process, like you said. And so it's really interesting, really put the impetus on us and ASU and Merlyn Mind to be the educators in this process, and Naomi too, right, to do all we can do to help these districts make the right decisions and these universities. A quick question here. Do either of you have any, business engagement in Africa or Nigeria? Is that no? Okay, so not relevant. And then the last, FERPA, COPPA, GDPR, are there any other kind of, major privacy laws, data privacy laws that the startups in the audience should be aware of?
Well, I mean, Naomi might be better suited to answer it, but I'll tell you one thing that's a subtle thing, okay, which is it's about safety with language models, okay, more relevant to K-12 than higher ed. And I'll draw a parallel here. If you look at movies have ratings. There are R-rated movies, PG-13, PG, etc. And so what that basically implies is that certain topics are not appropriate for certain age groups. Okay. So one of the issues when you run into something like ChatGPT is there are absolutely no filters. Okay. And if you put a wrapper on top of it, you're essentially talking to a language model that'll talk about any topic that you want to talk about. I mean, obviously, it's a very safe model. It will definitely not talk about something highly inappropriate. But what it won't have is this very fine-tuned distinctions that I'm now talking to a 6-year-old child or an 8-year-old child as opposed to a 24-year-old person. Okay, so there is a safety and age appropriateness responsibility that technology providers should be aware of here. Okay. Again, I do not intend to be coming across as a naysayer. I am all about the power of AI to transform education, but this responsibility is front and center. The responsibility of the founder or the startup CEO to be aware of that you have to build safe, age appropriate, private, secure AI for you to actually have a sustainable business. You could have some business, you could win it. A lot of these chat GPT rappers are going to be out of business in a year from now. Okay. And the last bit is about cost and effectiveness, which is where we started this entire conversation. Elizabeth was completely dead on when she said it's about using the right model for the right purpose and be responsible custodians of both the client's dollars as well as your dollars, and don't just lazily use GPT-4 for everything.
Yeah. And we're almost at time again. Elizabeth, I want to throw a quick question to you from the audience. So obviously we talked about everything around, data privacy. We talked around, trying to ensure accuracy, being good stewards of capital and making sure you're using the right model for the right thing. And then Satya just talked about safety. Is there anything else maybe that we didn't touch upon that you look for vendors to bring up as they try to gain your trust? Any other big topics that we haven't touched on around just being transparent and upfront?
Yeah, one of the areas that's really important to us is subject matter expertise. So if you are creating tools around teaching and learning in the classroom, do you have faculty members? Do you have former teachers that are employed in your company? Do you have folks who are experts in pedagogy? So having folks on your team, it doesn't have to be everyone on your team, but having some folks on your team having that subject matter expertise in-house in your company is something that engenders trust. Those folks having worked in that industry are also often very much aware of some of the compliance and regulations. So it helps in that space as well, of being able to understand not just the pedagogy, but also to be able to understand the regulation environment of those various areas, and then research and evidence. So doing your own research and evidence, and it doesn't have to be a formal, peer-reviewed process, but doing your own in-house research and evidence gathering around your tools, around the models that you're building. That's something that engenders trust with us and that we look for.
Awesome. That I think is a perfect place to end. I want to say thank you so much, Satya, Elizabeth, Naomi. I know that I learned so much on this webinar. And again, I really loved the strong call to action about how important this topic is and how exciting this technology is and how powerful it can be used within education and within our university and K-12 system, but that it comes with a lot of responsibility. So thank you again to all of our amazing speakers. And yeah, we hope to see everyone at the summit and at the ASU GSV Air Show. So bye, everyone.
Thanks, all.